We are the Martins. This is our story. George P. Martin Sr., Volume 1, son of Kit and Mary Martin, grandson of Armstead and Millie Martin. It all began in Stovall, Georgia, located approximately 70 miles south of Atlanta. The Martin family roots can be traced back to the 1700s to the Marshall Martin plantation, the land where our ancestors was born, enslaved, and freed on. Marshall Martin was a man who loved people and strived to be a good neighbor to all. A popular family story of when he defended a slave from an angry overseer. It was always said that in a cooler moment, the difficulties between the slave and the overseer were settled by Marshall Martin with justice and honor duly vindicated. An 1850 census shows 53 slaves, 12 horses, 7 mules, 14 cows, 8 oxen, and many other livestock. Also produced crops such as wheat, corn, oats, sweet potatoes, peas, beans, and of course cotton. After slavery, Armstead Sr. went to form his own land. This property, is also resting place of our ancestors. As Andrew tell us more.
All right, our travels takes us now here. We are in Stovall, Georgia, and this is the Martin Family Cemetery. This monument that I'm standing behind of was my cousin Ricky on my right and my cousin AB on my left. This is our ancestry. This is where it all starts as far as the Afro-American lineage. This is Armstead Martin Sr., born 1935, died in 1919. Armstead,
1835.
1835.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I gotta have an older man to correct me here. 1835 to 1919. Armstead had 9 children. One of those children was my great grandfather, KITT Martin, and in turn, KITT had 11 children, and one of those was George Martin, my grandfather. My grandfather George had 17 children, and one of those was my dad, Azil Martin. But we bring it back to the beginning. Armstead was born into slavery, and his paternal father was the son of the slave owner by the name of, what was his name?
Abram.
No,
Marshall?
Oliver.
No, Oliver's father's name was Marshall, right?
Yeah, I know, but
Yeah.
his Armstead's dad was Oliver.
Yeah, right.
Right. So, and we've researched that, and we have researched the lineage back to the slave days, back to the late 1700s. So this is where we are now. In the cemetery, you'll find a lot of characteristic names. A lot of the children were born, and they named them after their great uncles. For example, my grandfather, George Martin, named his son George because his uncle's name was George, and he named his junior George. Right, but in front of us is the grave of Armstead Martin Jr., the firstborn of Armstead Martin Sr. So we continue to bring this to full focus for our younger children to know our history. We're going to continue to add to this as we go along throughout the year so we can keep promoting our family history there. Ricky or AB, you guys have?
This is the land our ancestors walked. The Marshall Martin plantation is more than a place. It's a spiritual connection to our ancestors. So let's take a moment of silence to remember the ones that came before us.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my
One of Armstead's sons was named KITT. KITT Martin was born in 1867. Always a hard worker, he was a farmer and a craftsman by trade. As we traveled down the road to Greenville, Georgia, to the property of KITT and Mary Martin, KITT married a beautiful lady by the name of Mary K. Jackson. To their union, they had 11 children: Conyers, Mary, Will, James, Gonzalo, George, Channing, Moses, Tobias, Lovett, and Eddie B. KITT was once known as the meanest man in Georgia. He later became a minister and built the first black Church of God in Christ in Greenville, Georgia, which still stands to this day and known as Wilson Chapel. During the time he was building his church, he oftentimes had time to meet and fellowship, befriending many foreign African students. He was taken back by their names. He later named 3 of his sons by African names. KITT and Mary was devoted to their church until Mary's death in 1952 and KITT in 1957. They both died in Georgia. 2 sons, Will and George, moved away from their land when they became of age. Will to St. Louis and George Palmer to Silver Run, Alabama. George P. Martin Sr., the son of KITT and Mary Martin, was born in 1902. A farmer and craftsman by trade, George farmed and worked at Emery Pipe Shop to support his family. As we traveled to Lebanon Cemetery to the final resting place in Silver Run, Alabama, here's Andrew with more.
We're here down in Silver Run, Alabama, where the lineages of our family, our immediate family of George Martin and his offsprings were born and eventually branched out, and some are buried here. And when you look around here, you will see this cemetery that has about 8 different families. You have the Jenkins, you have the Martins, of course, the Balls, the Phillipses, the McClintons, and others that are all buried here in Lebanon Cemetery. This is our history. This is based our total history of our family. Just to give you a brief history of my family, my grandfather is George Martin, and his father was KITT Martin, and his father was Armstead Martin. So as we go through this documentary narrated by my cousin KITT Martin, you will see up to 8 generations of Martins, all their accomplishments and everything about them and the cemeteries in which they are buried at. Here in this cemetery, George Martin married a young lady by the name of Looney Martin, roughly around 1920. From that union, 5 children was born: George Palmer Martin, Mary Alice Martin, Eddie B. Martin, Asa Martin, who's my dad, and Christine Martin. After my grandmother Looney had childbirth with Christine, she died. Shortly after that, my grandfather George remarried, and he married a beautiful lady by the name of Cenas Martin. And to that union, they had 12 more children, from Rosie Mae all the way to Deborah, and 10 more in between. Here in this cemetery is the grave of my grandmother Looney, my grandfather George, my grandmother Cenas, my uncle George Martin, his lovely wife O.C. Martin, and my aunt Jeanette Anderson Martin, all buried here in this cemetery. This is part of our lineage. This is our history. This is primarily to educate our young, to let them know where we came from and right behind me, you'll see the family church. This is Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. This is where all the Martin clan of the descendants of George Looney and Cena's Martin worship that. Now, Aunt Alice and Aunt Christine went and they lived in Hogansville, Georgia with Uncle Scott and Aunt Levada Waves when they were children. But they still part of the family and worship here also when they were visiting. Uh, I remember many a time in our family reunions, Uncle George would be the presiding deacon over here. In the later years when Uncle Sherman retired, he was the presiding deacon at this church right here. Just want to remind everyone that this is our 39th year, 13th triennial, every 3 years family reunion. And I want to thank two people, individuals, Willie Martin and Sherman Martin Sr., because they're the two that started this, and our first reunion was in August of 1980. So continue to enjoy the festivities this evening. Once again, Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. Thank you.
As we come upon the Martin Lane sign, we come to the place that's known as the Hill. Once we cross the railroad track, we know we are embarking on great food, great fun, and most of all, great family memories. Let's reminisce.
That's right. You go there because I don't know my brother. Okay, zooming in on the Martin. And there's the ugly face and everybody just got scared. Okay. Look up, Lynn, say hi. All right, very good. You're now on camera. Very good. You all know that we do have a president, and Willie is our president for the past 3 years. And next year, we're going to ask all the children and all the brothers to come to Christ. Okay, but now he was the one that sort of started out, and I was next. Sort of hit him out, you know. He's the one that really got it going. So we'll say after this.
A united family beats with one heart. As a member of George P. Martin Sr. family lineage, we vow to recognize the bond between ourselves and all of our fellow family members. We will never degrade a family member or allow anyone else to do so. And we'll lift each family member up in prayer on a regular basis. When hard times befall a family member, we will not critique or criticize their prior actions, but we will make ourselves available to be supportive. We will always recognize the beat of our heart for generations to come. And most of all, we will not, we shall not, forget the ones that came before us, that laid down the foundations to allow us to be here today and strive 300 years later. As always, remember, one heartbeat, one unity, one soul, one spirit, and most of all, one love. We are the Martins.